economy, okay, looking at the fact that actors and performers across the Republic of South Africa are welcoming a significant move by the Department of Employment and Labour that could reshape work conditions in the space that they work in the creative fields, as it were. So, Labour and Employment Minister Nomakhosaza Meth has published a notice of intention to recognise actors, performers, and crew members as workers under the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. Okay, we definitely second that as a show, I can tell you that. Responding to long-standing concerns about job security, fair treatment within the industry, unfair dismissals, all of that falls under this particular act. So if it is adopted, the change would see performers in television, in film and advertising industries entitled to the same protection as other employees, including regulated working hours, overtime pay, and all of that, sick leave, maternity leave, all the rights that fall under this particular act. So let's have a conversation about this particular development within the creative sector and creative economy, as it were. We've got on the line a Labour lawyer. Michael Bagraim is joining me. Welcome, Michael. A pleasure to have you join us on Channel Africa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on air. I really appreciate it. This is a topic that's been a vexed topic. It's been something that's been debated for years. I think it's going to upset a lot of the industry. It'll obviously please a lot of the players in the industry. So it's been a long time coming, and I know that the department have been investigating it for over 2 years now. I also know that I have been speaking to some of the actors and people involved in the industry themselves. Yes. Some of them are unhappy, and I'll explain why. Some are very happy, and I can explain that. But you can imagine it's going to affect radio, television, in particular, even SABC. So let's get straight into it.
Right. I think perhaps let's get straight into that, because isn't this the crux of the conversation? What are the pros and cons of this particular regulation, if you will, when we look at the creative space? Because creatives want to be free, they want to determine their own working hours, but then on the other hand there's issues around exploitation and not getting paid correctly and not getting time off when they're sick or when they want to have a baby, etc. So what are the pros and cons of this particular law as we see it?
Well, yes, about almost 2 years ago, I had a discussion with a group of actors, independent contractors, let's call them, who contract themselves to foreign companies who come in particular to destinations such as Cape Town, which has become a favorite of the foreign film companies and foreign companies that make adverts. And they were saying that you've got to be careful about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because people do come to our jurisdiction because it is cheaper, let's face it. We have the facilities, which is cheaper as well. And also we have the ability. We have a very capable cohort of independent contractors. And that cohort, the group I spoke to in Cape Town, and then I spoke to another group who are in favor of this legislation. The group I spoke to in particular was saying that, first of all, a lot of these companies won't come here then. They can go to other jurisdictions in Africa, which is just as cheap, if not cheaper. They could possibly go to anywhere in Southern Africa where they could get the same facilities and probably cheaper rates. I mean, people like to be in South Africa because it's also a first world country, and it's got all the mod cons that they need, and they might not find that. I don't want to irritate any of our neighbors, but they might not find it in some particular neighboring countries. And they're saying that if they were made employees, it becomes very difficult to manage, because they might have a job for 3 hours at one company and later that afternoon for 2 hours at another, and then in the evening a third company. Who employs them? How do you manage the UIF, the workman's compensation, leave, all those sort of things? It's going to become an absolute nightmare, over and above the fact it's going to be impossible to police. They came up with a whole lot of other reasons why they don't want to do that because, like you've just mentioned, they want to control. They want to be masters of their own fate. They want to say, "Well, I'm prepared to sell you next Tuesday, but I can't on Wednesdays because I have a permanent feature on Wednesdays." So those people were pretty unhappy, and they voiced that quite strongly. Obviously, you're obviously going to do some research as a channel to look into those that are actually involved in the industry. I'm not involved, but as a lawyer, I was speaking to them and saying, well, you have better protection because if you fall under the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, then you have to get paid leave, paternity leave, maternity leave. Well, it's now one, it's family responsibility leave. You can get all of those things from the basic conditions. And they said, yes, but no one's going to want to take us, and then we don't have that control. And so you've got to look at it from both sides of the coin. And then what might happen, the next step, and we see this often from the Department of Employment and Labour, and I'm pointing a finger at them, they'll then try and get together a bargaining council, which is then controlled by trade unions and employers.
Yeah.
And that bargaining council is going to make it even more expensive. So there you have it. There are problems from both sides.
Well, it sounds like there's more problems than solutions. I really want us to tackle this further, especially from a labor union's perspective, Michael. But let's take a break. We'll be right back.
In your hands. Connect to our website for all your news, sports, and cultural updates. ChannelAfrica.co.za. 60 years of Channel Africa. Your trusted voice. Your African perspective. Into the future.
Es-tu préoccupé par quelque chose? Es-tu passionné par les questions qui comptent? As-tu une voix qui mérite d'être entendue? Eh bien, nous avons la plateforme parfaite pour toi. Téléphone-nous ou fais-nous un WhatsApp au +27 66 408 87 42 et nous te rappellerons. Sois dans la conversation.
Salut Channel Africa, ici Beno le diamant rouge et Binal Export depuis le Cameroun, le pays des lions. Voilà.
Sois dans la conversation. Il ne s'agit pas seulement de parler, mais c'est ta chance d'exprimer ton point de vue, de partager tes opinions et de t'engager avec une communauté qui valorise ton avis. Suivez-nous sur les réseaux sociaux, visitez notre site www.channelafrica.co.za et préparez-vous à partager vos points de vue sur Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
The Upside, 1 to 4 p.m. Central African Time. With Deboholi Kuleni and Mmatsheko Mosito. Only on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
A very important conversation we're having around the Basic Conditions of Employment Act and the fact that things could change for creative spaces when we look at the film industry and the advertising industry and the music industry, perhaps as well as they fall under creative and performing acts, as it were, in South Africa. So we're having this conversation around the fact that the Ministry of Labour and Employment has published a notice of intention to recognize performing artists, crew members, and anyone that works under this particular creative economy to be recognized under the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. The pros and cons of this is what we're weighing with Michael Bagraim, who is a labor lawyer, and he joins me on the line. Michael, thank you very much for giving us, and I think what's really wonderful is the fact that you've spoken to people that work in the business, and they have been able to share with you what they are disgruntled about and perhaps what they are, cheerful about and hopeful about under this particular act. So how does this then now affect contracts that are currently in place, and do we have any indication from government as to when this will be gazetted in Parliament?
Well, obviously legislation always overrides contracts. As soon as the legislation's in force, that will override the contract. Right. And if that person goes off to the CCMA, they will then be able to argue that the contract is against public morals, it's against the legislation, and therefore the contract becomes null and void. It's going to really irritate the company that's employing them or supposedly employing them. That's the first thing. The second thing is, unfortunately, and it's, we're a democracy in South Africa, and democracy legislation is slow, tedious. It's like walking through, body length to try and get it through. So this
Right.
got to go first. First, it goes off. It's now been put together by the Department of Employment and Labour. I presume their lawyers have had a look at it. I have had no feedback from them whatsoever about this. It then goes off to the presidency. The president's lawyers will look at this first to see if it goes against our constitution, if there's anything there that breaches our constitution, and then have to get sent back to the department. Once it goes through the presidential lawyers, it then goes to the parliamentary lawyers who look at it. And as you can well imagine, lawyers are also a little bit tedious. I mean, as a lawyer myself, I need to point fingers that they retard everything, unfortunately. And then it'll go off to the Portfolio Committee of Employment and Labour, who will debate it. And then it goes to the public for public hearings, and we'll probably see people in the industry feeding there. Once it's been there and it gets with all those amendments after listening to the public and the lawyers and all various sets of lawyers, it'll then eventually work its way, if everyone's happy that something should happen, work its way into Parliament, and there it'll be debated by the parliamentary parties. It might even go back to the public again. I suspect 5 years. It's not imminent, so I don't want to put panic into any of the foreign companies that are planning to make a movie in South Africa. Please come, please be here. Nothing changes for the next few years.
Right.
Everything remains the same. Your contracts remain in place. So let's not panic our trading partners on this. And let's not also panic because if you look at the definition that they're talking about, it'll include DJs, radio announcers, it'll include your position as you stand there now. And as you know, most of the radio stations don't actually employ their DJs, their radio announcers. They have contracts with them as independent contractors.
That's right.
In fact, I think all of them do. I speak to dozens of radio stations and TV stations every day, and they all have. And the staff sometimes are very disgruntled because there it's more conducive for employment as opposed to independent contractors. Because as a radio announcer, you do a day's job. You don't jump from one hour here and 2 hours there and that sort of thing. You do a whole day's job. So there it's probably more conducive to employment circumstances. But all the radio stations challenge that. I don't know why, but their challenges probably make it easier for them to hire and fire because you're not firing an employee, so you can't go off to the CCMA. We've had some famous cases.
Right.
In the past, there was McKinsey versus the SABC, which was one of the first cases heard. This was many years ago, about 30 years ago. And the SABC won the case and said McKinsey wasn't an employee, but he'd been there for 30 years. I can talk about it because McKinsey's now passed on. But I was very interested then. That was 30 years ago in the early days of my labor law practice as an attorney. And the SABC argued very cogently that they don't want him as an employee. They're employing him for his skills, specific skills. And he was a good, I don't know what you call it, DJ or radio announcer. And they said that he can leave them as soon as he wants to. He can negotiate his own wages with them, etc. And they won that case and it got appealed and they won it again. So that's the law at the moment, that radio stations, TV stations can actually have independent contractors, even though they work there every day of their lives for the last 30 years or whatever. On that particular type of formula, I would argue that they actually are employees, but the courts are against me on that. But if the legislation changes, then the courts have to go with me on that one. Whether you can become an employee if you're doing a bit part as an extra in an advert and they need you for 3 hours and then they'll need you a week later for another 2 hours, it's going to be an absolutely impossible task to monitor that and to have oversight on that one. Already we have half the employees in this country that have no rights whatsoever, and the department can't get to them, and they actually are employees. So you can imagine the nightmare that we're walking into. I'm not saying don't do it. It is ripe now for a discussion, And the government is right to say, let's put it on the table, because there are many in that industry, in the acting industry, that actually want rights. I mean, if you have maternity leave, at least then you can earn something out of it through the UIF. But at the moment, if you're on maternity and you're an independent contractor, you get nothing.
It's such a tricky one at this time, Michael, because I mean, who benefits from this? And I mean, anyone can get off on reasonable doubt by the sounds of things still, but who benefits really from the implementation of, or the change of the Employment Act that is said to, going to be protecting the creative economy? That remains to be seen, because with each space within this vast ecosystem of creativity are so many factors and so many different things. I mean, the radio space is so different to advertising, and different to film, and different to, television, if you will. So here we are. We're sitting now. We've got a headache about the marriage court, and now we've got a headache around freelance employment. But Michael, thank you very much. It's unfortunate we have run out of time. It would have been wonderful to look at, how this then affects how unions in creative spaces are going to operate. But I guess we can contact you in person if we wish to have a sit down with you. Where can we find you? Where are your offices?
My offices are in Cape Town. I presume you're not in Cape Town, but I can be anywhere in the country. As long as it's South Africa, I'm not prepared to leave South Africa.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Bagraim, a labor lawyer, discussing with us something very, very important. So now we've got a lot to think about, okay? So in the meantime, whilst we chew on that, let's take the sports bulletin.
Get the news, music, and